Ireland is retro. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Mega Regenesis.
Huelsbeck Beckons.
Would you like some retro, Father?
All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, Dave.
Top of the morning to you.
Top of the morning, Dave. Wonderful accent work.
You
there.
will.
Ah, go on. What did you say to a cup of tea, Father?
I'm not starting the show again, Duncan.
What do you say to it? What do you say to it?
We're joined by a guest today,
Game of Sonic the Hedgehog. You will have a game of Sonic the Hedgehog. Oh, you will.
Confusingly, our guest isn't even Irish.
Well, he says
genetically, yes, but vocally, no.
Alan, welcome to the show. Alan runs a YouTube channel called Happy Coding ZX.
Hello.
He plays around with Spectrum stuff mostly, and he has created some absolutely astonishing arcade ports far beyond the quality of what we had back in the day, or far beyond what I thought the Spectrum could do, from spooky Manic Miner stuff. He's gone on to make DKRX, Lunar Rescue RX, Pac-Man RX, and his latest is Scramble RX. Welcome on, Alan.
Glad to be here, guys. It's an honor and a privilege.
What's the RX for, Alan?
Well, it's actually it started out as basically it's a combination of two things. One is remix and the other is redux. So it means I kind of remake the games and then I remix them. So that's kind of how it works.
RX, nice. I like it. Well, Dave, let's start with you and we'll get to Alan, what we've been up to this week. Dave, you have been fannying around with an Amiga, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got an Amiga. It's a nice Amiga, but I upgraded it this week. I added a Terrible Fire 1260 with a revision 6060. Mm-hmm. And I also added a Solus, which is a clock port module for it that does lots of different things, including the Knight Rider effect, LEDs at the front, or the VU meters, as well as automated fan control and other things.
And it went as smoothly as you could have hoped for, this installation.
Yeah, so it took me about half an hour to do it, and that was me done. Oh, hang on, no, it took me like 4 days. And I initially, I don't know how, there was a short somewhere, never really found out why, and I ended up having to put a bodge wire on the back of the Amiga, which I did very neatly. I was quite pleased with that.
Blew out a track, didn't you?
Yes.
The power supply, yeah.
And then later, I had an IDE cable plugged into an IDE buffer, plugged into an IDE splitter, plugged into an SD card reader, and somewhere along the lines I've got one reversed, which caused this fuse to go, which I'm calling a fuse. It's really an IDE cable, to burn out.
Oh, I see.
With the second short of the build, but it's all sorted now and it all looks fantastic. And I will give a picture to Duncan, which will appear on your screens now, but not if you're listening to the podcast, because I can't invade your brain, showing my Amiga. It looks great. It's all black with a matching gateway black monitor and the Checkmate case and the Checkmate keyboard thing. Looks fantastic. I'm delighted with it.
It was interesting to follow your fault-finding process with a lot of help from Pillock along the way as well, our resident Amiga specialist, or one of many. And you're lucky, really. You're lucky that you didn't have any knock-on effects from some of the short, especially not blowing something else up or custom chip. So
it's funny how when it's your own thing, your head goes to mush. If someone else was asking, I could give them advice. When it was myself, it's like, Pillock, help me.
Well, this week, I've been keeping you posted every week with the Arcadia project and the port of Seekanoid that Hoffman did over to ROMs. And we have finally flashed those ROMs, put them in a card and tested them. And it worked first time. So we now have the first Arcadia Super Select System game in 35 years running on actual hardware.
I know something about that you don't. And I'm not saying anything.
Is there an Easter egg that's going to offend everyone that comes
I have
in
nothing. No, not nothing to worry about. But I cannot say any more.
Okay. I've requested one change, which is that I've just asked him to swap the joysticks around on his code because right is move and left is shoot, and it just feels all wrong.
No.
The other way around.
It should be, yeah. And I don't know why is it that way. Why does it naturally feel as if left should move, right should shoot? Why?
Don't know, but yeah, he'll get that fixed. And then the other thing I've been working on is this is a true story. A relative of mine asked for some help for upgrading her PC. Gave me the old one and said, can you transfer the data off of it? And this was her daily driver up until a couple of weeks ago. It's a tiny branded PC, Pentium 2, slot 1 CPU, 128 meg of RAM and an 8 gig hard drive. That is what she's been using until the present day. And I might add quite happily, because it's not been online. She's been using Word and Excel. All of her files are neatly filed away in the file system, doing exactly what she wants it to do. Doesn't want to go on the internet with it, so there've been no problems on that side. And the only reason she's replacing it is because she has fear of failure of it blowing up because it's so old or the hard drive crashing. So she's done the right thing to save her data in that respect. But I've been looking for advice on how to virtualize that old machine so she can run a virtual version of it on her new Windows 11 machine, because that's what she wants, you know? And it's difficult when you go asking people for advice, when you know the person and what they want, and you're talking to people like me who would go, use PCM because it will have the most authentic emulation of the BIOS. Use DOSBox, use this, use that. I've ended up using VMware version 9, just because it's nice and compatible with 98 and has the guest tool editions to install on it. And she can drag and drop files off the virtual desktop onto the real desktop and back again, nice and easily. And that's all she needs. So we're going to transfer the files over now. That's all set up. Get it working.
I was quite impressed that there was a document on there, or a series of documents that listed everything that was in the loft. They got up there and just listed all the stuff there, and I thought, I wish I was that organised. Yeah. And I'm not even. I'm not having a go. I mean, this is great. This is someone who has a piece of technology and just uses it for what it's intended to do. So it's nice to hear that Windows 98 is good now as it was before.
That's what it was intended to do. And I started going into those folders, and then I stepped back because I was like, I'm getting a bit too far into this person's brain for comfort. This is private.
Personal, yeah.
It's there, it's saved. Yeah. Close that folder, and away we go. So yeah, all good. Alan, tell us about your week. Have you been doing anything retro this week?
Oh, yes. Well, I just finished, Dave mentioned the game Scramble. That was a bit of a rush at the end because...
a bit of a scramble.
By the scramble. Yay.
Yes, indeed. Last yes.
Carry on, Alan. I do apologise for Dave.
That's all right. No problem. Dave and I have history. That's no problem. Anyway, November is it's a bit of a mad time for me, really, because it's when I come over to the UK. By the time this goes out, I think I'll have just arrived in the UK. So it's about...
Where are you now?
I'm in Astana, Kazakhstan, Central Asia. So it's a bit of a trek, actually. I'll be flying to Frankfurt first, and then on to London, where I'm staying with a friend of mine, and then I'll be going up north to see the family. But I kind of ties in with the Crash event, which I know Neil, you and we met there last time, and I've got a little software label that I run, and we put out a collection each year that we launch at the event.
Don't be afraid to plug yourself, Alan. What's your software label called?
So basically that label is called Midnight Brew. We started it around 2021-22. So it's been going this will be the third collection that we do. But this year we kind of branched out. We've done a collection of a double set, a twin set of older games, Frankenstein and Dracula. So you might know the game Frankenstein. It's a Colin Stewart game from the early 80s. And we added music and a few little extras and put it out in a special box set. And then, obviously, because I felt like I wasn't nearly busy enough, I also decided then to put our whole digital collection out as a charity release in November. And that's for the Movember charity, you guys are probably familiar with. with that? Do you guys know?
Yeah, we know November. Yeah, that's the mustache-related event.
It is. I mean, I don't have a mustache, I'm afraid. I shave my head especially for this episode for you guys. But no beard as yet. You guys have got me beaten there. I think I've got the glasses. Dave's got all three: the bald, the glasses, and the beard, which is the full retro set. You know, I've only got the two. You've got two as well. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But getting back to that. So I've been a big advocate of actually, when I set Midnight Brew up, it was just after a year or so of the pandemic. I was stuck here in Kazakhstan. I hadn't seen my family for a couple of years. My school had closed down. I mean, I'm happily married, so I wasn't completely alone, and my wife was fantastic during that time. But it was a difficult time because we had I'd lost most of my livelihood, right? So I needed to find something to dive into, and that's how that got started. So it got me thinking about how guys our age kind of deal with difficult times and crises and so on. I mean, our parents are getting older, and sometimes we lose friends and all, difficult things like this, and we don't often talk about it. And so that's kind of why I decided to tie this in with what we do at Midnight Brew, to kind of raise awareness of that and show that being creative with this hobby and being sociable with this hobby are really great ways to give yourself a bit of purpose, a bit of community feeling, and it can really help to deal with some of those things that we're all facing, And so I think that's a really positive thing, and I hope we can get that message across. And I know that's something that you guys also help. I'm sure that you guys get a lot of messages from people within your community about how that also helps them, So
we do in the Cave and the This Week in Retro community, and on Discord. It's definitely a lovely place for everyone to come together and share their problems to a degree. But as you say, it's very hard to sometimes get those problems off your chest and know what is a safe space and what isn't, and where to do it. So all credit to you for getting behind this. And the package that you've made there with Frankenstein and Dracula is a lovely foam packed box with the 2 cassette tapes in there. It's a really nice special thing. You've got to go that extra mile when you release a physical game. You've got to give something extra. And that's
absolutely,
really nice, that package. Yeah.
And we got the I'm not so crazy about the kind of stickers and badges and stuff like that, but I know the feelies people talk about. But I wanted to make it into a sort of historical thing because it's a 40th anniversary. So we've got like the original design documents that Colin used. He still had them in his loft, the graph paper and all that sort of stuff. And we got some restored artwork from Oliver Frey. And so we've included that. So it's a nice little slice of homebrew history, if you like.
Fantastic.
So where can people buy this?
It's just midnightbrewgames.com. And I should say the compilation that we've done, which is all of our digital versions of all our games, plus we reached out to the wider community and got a lot of people to also donate games. So there's more than 50 games in the pack. It was originally going to be 48, but we just kind of pushed it a little bit, and the price is just £16. So
you didn't want to be outdone by cassette 50, yeah. So.
that was part of originally. That did cross my mind. This kind of SD 50, like let's do a Cascade 50,
but they're good games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, the links to that and anything else we discuss will be in the show notes. And I see you've also done a special unboxing video on your Happy Coding YouTube channel. So Duncan may take a few clips from there just while we've been talking about that to show people, if that's okay with you, Alan.
Absolutely fine, yeah.
Fantastic. And Dave, shall we get into our first story?
Yeah, let's go on with it. Shall I start by getting on my soapbox again this week? Yes, I will. 1988, Sega released the Mega Drive in Japan.
Sega.
Sega. They didn't release the Genesis in Japan because it's not called the Genesis. It's called the Mega Drive. And in the USA, it was known as the Genesis, but it shouldn't be renamed to the Genesis because that's the US name. Yet, if you go to Moby Games or Wikipedia, they don't list it as the Mega Drive, they list it as the Genesis. This is wrong, and it does annoy me. Now that's out of my system, let's talk about a time extension article submitted by Squelch411. It's written by Damien McFerrin, and on his bio page on time extension explains that he started with the Atari ST and then moved to the Mega Drive. He's the editorial director for the whole group of websites. So when he picked the headline for his story about the Mega Drive, why did he call it a Genesis? Come on, Damien, you're not even American. Why are you doing this to us?
Dave, what do you call spring onions in Scotland?
Sibbos.
Sibbos. Why don't you call them spring onions?
I call them spring onions.
Wow. I mean, technically, they come from China, so they weren't called spring onions, were they? They were called tongs, or tong, I think is the right pronunciation.
Are you defending the Genesis here, Neil?
I'm just saying that, people in glass houses, Scots in glass houses shouldn't throw haggai.
Well, actually, Dave, if we go by your sort of Wolfenstein thing, then shouldn't you, if it's Japanese, shouldn't you be calling it Mega Drive? As it is called in Japan. That's the correct Japanese pronunciation.
Mega Drive. That's what I'll call it from now on. Mega Drive.
Mega Drive.
Right.
There you go.
That's you told, Dave.
Mega Drive. That's how you should be saying it. Well, if you're gonna, you got to be consistent. If you're gonna say Wolfenstein, then you have to say Mega Drive.
I am anything but consistent. Never mind all that, though. The article is good. It is an interesting article, and here's what it's about. 36 years ago, after it released, there are so many new Genesis games. The Genesis didn't release 36 years ago. The Genesis released 35 years ago. It was the Mega Drive, the Mega Drive, that released 36 years ago. There are so many new Genesis games, someone has built a site to track them all. And what is this place? It's not the Genesis tracker, because the person that made it, Molly Penn, is civilized and calls it the Mega Drive tracker. The Mega Drive tracker. It has the games from 2024 and a few from 2023, and the intention is to keep it up to date with new releases and, in fact, upcoming games, but also to look back and to add more from the past. But actually what it has most of is upcoming games. So when I looked, there's 31 games on it, and 6 of those have been released. The site is actually, it looks quite Spartan, but don't let that deceive you, because it's pretty packed with all the pertinent information that you need. The search and the filter work well. So what we're seeing here is a site that's fit for purpose for the future, for hundreds of games as time goes on. The site will work with those. As far as I can see, there's no hosting of any ROMs on the site, so it just links you to where you can find more information, etc. And it's serving as a central hub to get the information that you need. So I'm not sure what the criteria is to get on that site, if the game needs to be a certain quality or if it's a subjective thing, I don't know. But it also applies a really, really useful category for them that I wish other places would use. They categorize things as reprints, localizations, ports, or a new game. And I don't want to knock any of those categories, but I do find it's useful when I'm browsing games for a system to find out what's unique to that system. The game that's on there that has been released that is a brand new game is called Life on Earth. And funnily enough, despite not knowing much about the Mega Drive at all, I did recognise it because I had a look at it on a YouTube video from On a Retro Tip. I did a review of it last year, and I'd watched that video just by chance. And the game reminded me loads about Robocop, but it's a bit more faster and frenetic and probably better.
It's definitely got a kind of Alien 3 feel about the main sprite running and gunning.
Yeah, but the actual gameplay itself, though, you start off with lots of health and you have to take hits. Like Robocop, there's no escaping them. You can't avoid all the hits, and the weapons you pick up have ammunition, etc. It's a bit faster though. But moving away from the Mega Drive specifically to game development in general, it does feel as if there's plenty going on. We won't mention Second, I've just mentioned it there, haven't I? But with Alan's games, for example, and plenty for other platforms. What I'm concerned about, though, and I have noticed, is that new games get released and then forgotten. So I'm glad that these sites exist to keep note of the games. How's this kind of thing with the Spectrum, Alan, and how do you keep up to date with new Sega releases? I know you're a big Sega fan.
Well, for the Spectrum, initially there was World of Spectrum, and then there's also Spectrum Computing, which are both websites. There's obviously Indie Retro News as well that publishes a lot of the games, and there's the Facebook group. So there isn't a one-stop place that you can go to find all this stuff, but the community is fairly small, and people kind of word gets around pretty quick when a new game comes out. It's a pretty healthy scene. There are usually 2 or 3 games a week, even, I would say. There's a friend of mine, Andre, who's in Portugal, and he reviews pretty much everything that comes out for the Spectrum. And I've got to know him pretty well. I always send him my games even before they come out, so that he can get his review ready when they come out. So. Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. I mean, this site, I think, I sort of went into it expecting a bigger library, really, but then I read the notes, and the person said what they did is that they wanted to keep track of the physical releases. It's only physical, this database, and so those are games that are put out. They're usually quite limited numbers, aren't they? Right. So some of them a few hundred, maybe 1,000.
Yeah, that's why it talks about the reissue. Yeah.
Yeah, and this person felt that they'd missed out on a few. That by the time they'd found out about them, they were sold out. So I think that's kind of the purpose of that. But it definitely would be a good idea to have a wider database of these games, because it's very. It's a very independent scene, isn't it? So there's no, if you look with the original Sega and Nintendo, they were all official titles with specific numbers and everything else, right? So it would be good to be able to explore that. This is not a plug, but part of the reason why we did the Midnight Brew thing with the charity was to put a lot of classic games to get homebrew together for people to explore, right? That was part of the thinking of that collection. But I had a little look, and I found that there's a site called Homebrew Hub that does kind of Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. There's that Game Boy Color, I think. That seems really healthy. The NES has got loads of stuff coming out as well. So it would definitely be nice for people to have a way to kind of filter that out and find it. I mean, itch.io, I put all my games on that. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Itch, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of indie stroke retro site. So you can find modern stuff and you can find old stuff as well, but it's all done with that homebrew ethic, I suppose, right? That kind of, a lot of it is one person making the game, right? So that's certainly a nice way to do that. And so it would be a good thing, I think, to have a site where you can keep track of everything. Yeah.
New games for retro systems, they're quite easily forgotten because they make their splash and then they kind of disappear. And that's true of modern gaming as well. But because the market is so much bigger, the games then live on through our shared experience of playing them and talking about them, just the number of people who have played them. So if I talk about Outrun or Bomb Jack, we've all got memories of that. If I mention a retro game released 3 years ago, you'd be forgiven for never having heard of it if you missed the Kickstarter or the announcement on one of the news sites, or you didn't listen to the one episode where we mentioned it. So I suppose that's why you get these special editions. This is why you get them put on cartridges and sold as premium games when they come out, because they want to satisfy the demand. They want to smash them out in a premium way. But if you travel too far down that road, you do then end up at the door of somewhere like Limited Run Games, who are now tackling their own image crisis with the recent CDR fiasco and trying to balance feelies and limited editions with profit margins. So that goes to the other end of the scale, to the kind of indie scene that you're involved in there, Alan. Keeping up on the website, though, I think it's welcome. It's a very welcome website. It's a very simple website, a little less simple than your first impressions, as you've both described. Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I was thinking about the technology, right, in terms of what's available and how you can produce this stuff now. So things like the 3D printing and the internet and all that, a lot of that has made it much more possible to produce this really high quality stuff, which is commercially as production value wise, it's as good as the original games when they came out. So there's
3D
this
printing,
kind of,
is a very good point, because when you go into the realms of injection molding, then you've got to meet minimum numbers to make things affordable. But PCBs are very cheap, so you can knock out some cheap cartridges.
It's an amazing time, really. I mean, it's a little bit like, we say homebrew, but I would even hesitate to call some of this stuff homebrew. It's almost like it's like microbreweries. Like it's not so much beer at home. It's like little sort of mini breweries that put out their own specific stuff. Craft
retro, to get a longer
maybe.
Hipster beard then.
Yes.
homebrew does make you think of a hand-drawn cassette inlay stuffed in a get out. We're talking, quite a higher level of quality than that, for sure.
You could call it craft beer, craft retro, something like that.
Craft retro.
Yeah, the website itself, though, it does link out to the official website for each game that it's talking about, but in 20 years, those websites might not exist anymore. So I quite like the Lemon Amiga approach, if you've been to that website, where each game is described in detail. There's user reviews, there's screenshots, there's music, and then there's links out to the website. So if the official website's lost, you can still read about the history of it. I think it's a good start, though. I think it's the genesis of a website that I think will mature if there's some Mega Drive behind it, Dave.
Thank you, Neil.
I'd like to see I'd like to see both the digital and the physical represented myself, though, because I think a lot of that stuff is really good.
Yeah, I think the site creator has made sure she's not taking on more than she can handle. I think setting reasonable aspirations and then achieving them is much better than starting a project and saying, I'm going to have everything here, and then not managing it.
Yeah, agreed.
If you do have any interest in the Mega Drive, though, bookmark the site. Keep an eye out for new games for your console. We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict Magazine. Pixel Addict Magazine comes out every so often. Richard worked out once, didn't he? 40-something days?
Yeah, something like that.
42?
Something like that. 42 could be.
Douglas Adams, we can easily remember.
Yeah, Douglas Adams is the editor of Pixel Addict Magazine. They have a special coming out soon, the Atari Addict, the wonderful faded green cover for it that they've carefully done. They've got an interview with Nolan Bushnell in it, of all people.
They've made the cover look damaged and destroyed so that you don't have to do it yourself.
Yeah. Boo. Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari, he talks about Atari cabinets and how the company formed. There's lots of different stuff in there. Go and buy that, as well as Pixel Addict Magazine this week. Thank you very much for sponsoring us. Where can people go to buy this, Alan?
Pixel.addict.media?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Ding, ding,
you
ding.
Passed the test. You passed the test. Thank you for sponsoring us.
A submission that caught my attention this week is a video called Chris Huelsbeck, the Sound
Deja
Magician. Yeah, and thank you to Weeping Scorpion for sharing it. Dave says that because I got my words all mixed up and we've just started this story again. But you don't have to know about that because of Duncan's seamless editing. This is a German language video which can be enjoyed with the auto caption translate feature of YouTube, and you can enjoy it. That's how I enjoyed it. Translates it very well if you do not sprechen die Deutsch. And it begins by describing Chris as the Hans Zimmer of the video game music world. We did have a little look, and I think Dave found that Hans Zimmer is credited on some video games, but we don't think he made original video game music. We think his orchestral music was used in games like Pirates of the Caribbean. So Chris can hold that title of the Hans Zimmer of the video game music world. First game that comes to mind when I think of Chris Huelsbeck is the brilliant Turrican 2 music, the title theme especially, a masterpiece, with or without stereo separation, Dave.
do 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 do.
That's it. That's the London
Desert
Wide
one.
Boy edit. Other tunes I enjoyed from him include the music from Z Out, the Great Gianna Sisters, Battle Isle, and Apidia, just from my own experiences. But of course, his list of credits is extensive and runs from the Commodore 64 all the way into iOS games. And I do believe he's still active today with his music career. The video tells of Chris's background, how his grandma and 6 months of saving on a paper round afforded him his first Commodore 64. He got wind that the C64 had this lovely synth chip in it, and that was his low-cost point of entry into having a synth. And he pivoted from trying to create games on the machine to simply specializing in the game music, using assembly to compose. He created a system he called a Music Master and found recognition through a music making competition in a magazine with a track named Shades, which some of you may be familiar with. I would encourage Duncan to link out to some of these tracks on YouTube. I think many of them might cause copyright strikes because of the re-releases that Chris has done on his various albums, so just be a bit careful there, Duncan. Chris went on to develop a technique to give the impression of 4 voices coming from the 3-voice SID chip, something Martin Galway was also working on. And of course, we can't mention those 2 names without mentioning Rob Hubbard. They are sort of the holy trinity, the titans of the SID chip. The video goes on to describe him dropping out of school, his various jobs, starting with getting a foot in the door at Rainbow Arts, and how he broke down more technical barriers, again, squeezing 7 channels out of the 4-channel Amiga. Dave?
Can you do Martin Galway's accent?
No, but someone told me, I think he actually lives in New York or somewhere in America now and has done for some time, and is a big Tesla fanatic and an Uber driver or something like that. I may be thinking of someone completely different, so don't quote me on this, but I think Martin Galway might be an Uber driver now.
Really?
Maybe.
Well, okay, fair enough. Heard it here first.
Chris has gone on to release over 50 albums, which you can find on Bandcamp. And for a period, I love this part of his story. For a period, he lived in a large camper van driving around America with a studio in the back, making music. Now that's living. I like the idea of that. The thing that really stands out watching this video is that Chris is consistently developing the tech behind the music as well as the tunes, even well into the 90s, when most are moving to CD-based soundtracks in video games. Chris worked on things like the Resident Evil 2 port on the N64, squeezing a 2-CD game and all of its music into a 64-megabyte cartridge. He had his Amiga music making system, the C64 one. He made his C64 one available to others with a program he called Sound Monitor. So all throughout his career, his technical understanding of the machines is what's let him express his musical genius in ways that others can't, because they don't have control of the machines in the same way that he did. So, great video about Chris Huelsbeck. Let's talk music. Dave, your Huelsbeck memories, your thoughts in general about the video and the topic, fire away.
I first came across his music on X-Out on the Atari ST. He didn't do a lot of Atari ST music, but he did do X-Out, and the title music of that is fantastic. I don't know if I've played it on the Amiga though, so I don't know if it's the same music that you would get on the Amiga for it. But X-Out is well received on the ST. It's a good game. And of course, Turrican 2. And Turrican 2 is that his masterpiece? I don't know. It's absolutely fantastic. I love the music to Turrican 2. It really does suit the game. But since then, of course, I've heard him on Amiga games and, of course, Katakis on the C64, a fantastic R-Type inspired game, shall we say, on the C64 Katakis. But he wasn't really making games for music for the games that I played, so he kind of, apart from the ones I've mentioned, he kind of passed by me. The video is fantastic, though. The video is actually really surprisingly watchable with the subtitles.
As a guy who was using the Atari ST a lot in that period, are there any names, any musicians' names that stand out as being sort of the Atari ST musician guy?
Rob Hubbard?
Not really. Yeah, Rob Hubbard, yeah.
Yeah, Rob Hubbard is the one that I remember the most.
Yeah.
And of course from the Amstrad CPC, Monty on the Run, just fantastic music there. Although it might have been his wife that did that one.
Yes, as we learned, he would write the music on the C64 and then just sort of leave the code for his wife to transcribe. Port.
But the videos,
I think it was quite easy for Spectrum and Amstrad music coders to upgrade to the ST because the chip was more or less the same, if I'm not mistaken. So
yeah. There was a very, very similar chip. It was different, but a very similar chip. And there's some things like the Thundercats music, for example, sounds the same on both. The video is really surprisingly watchable, even though it's in German, with YouTube automated subtitles and then translation to English. So it's going through 2 levels of potential introduction of gibberish, which doesn't seem to happen very much with it. It's very good. So I really did enjoy it.
Yeah. Alan, did you get to watch this video, or do you have any thoughts about Chris Huelsbeck's legacy?
Sure. Well, I watched a little bit of it. I didn't have time, unfortunately, to watch the whole thing, but it did get me thinking about the sort of history of video game music and the differences between Japanese video game music and European video game music. And I'm a huge fan of Japanese video game music, a lot more than I am European. That's just my own personal taste. But it kind of struck me, and it was interesting from what you said, that I think a lot of the European composers, a lot of them come from the kind of demo scene, and they're usually very technical in terms of the knowledge and the coding. Mm-hmm. You mentioned, squeezing as much as you could out of the machine. And that's a really interesting driver for pushing the limits. And that's something that I think a lot of gamers in the West are quite impressed by, right? But I think, and it's a little bit stereotypical, but I think in Japan, the music is it's a little bit more integrated into the game. They have a more collaborative approach, and it's less in your face. It's more like, what does the game want, Yeah,
I think quite often with European games, certainly British games, the music was entirely developed independently of the game, and very often without any reference to the game really, other than here's a couple of bits of art from the game, this is a game title, give us some music in time for the release.
Yeah, I was thinking about, obviously the big Japanese composer is Koji Kondo, who did Zelda and Mario. And when you got to the stage where the machine, limitations of the machine weren't an issue, so if you think about like the GameCube era, the music for Wind Waker and Super Mario Sunshine is just phenomenal, but not necessarily something I would listen to on its own, but within the game, the atmosphere, the role that it plays, as part of the storytelling is amazing, and most of the composers that I really like kind of do that, and I think that goes right back to the early arcade games. I think Japanese coders were putting music into games. If you think about, say, for example, Donkey Kong or Pac-Man, right? Immediately, they were adding that little element, that little bit of extra to the story. So, yeah, probably my favorite is composer Michiru Yamane, who did Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. Probably one of my favorite games, one of the best soundtracks. And as soon as you hear the name, as soon as you think, I can hear it now in my head immediately, and it blends so perfectly with the game. So
I don't know enough about Japanese micro industry to know if there was a Chris Huelsbeck or a Rob Hubbard of the MSX world, for example, because when I think of Japanese game development of that era, I think of the videos you see of a tour of a game studio for usually a console-based games, because they were so console heavy over there, and a whole department with a guy with a synth all hooked up to the dev kit, just focused on that. Whereas in Chris Huelsbeck's example and other European coders, he actually went into it wanting to code games and got to that technical level with assembly language, and then said, actually, I'm going to team up with a mate and do the music for his game, and went from there. So yeah, quite really interesting points that you bring up there, Alan, and different approaches. But if anyone out there knows who is the Chris Huelsbeck of the MSX world, or any lesser known 8-bit micro from Japan,
you could probably say that Hiroshi Kawaguchi, he does Outrun and Space Harrier and all of that kind of thing. So maybe he is that sort of guy, perhaps, maybe.
Dave, book some Japanese guests to fill us in as well. What was the, just before we move on, completely unrelated, Alan, have you ever looked into the Kazakhstani retro computing scene?
It's non-existent.
There we go. Easily answered.
Well. Actually, no. Actually, I do have a little anecdote about that.
Okay.
The only retro story I can think of within Kazakhstan is, I live in Astana, which is now the capital. It's only really a sort of 20-year-old city, so there is nothing here in terms of retro. But Almaty, on the other hand, was a well-established kind of city for a few hundred years, and so there was a little bit of a retro scene there. And you guys, I know, Neil, that you have an Enterprise. Was it called was it Enterprise? Not Elan, was it? What was it?
Yeah, it was the Elan Enterprise, but also known as the Flan.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a Z80 based 8-bit machine with fairly powerful, but not a big hit in the UK. A lot of them, as you may have mentioned in your video, Neil, a lot of them were sent out to Hungary.
Yeah.
But a little known fact is that about 500 of them turned up in a warehouse in Almaty in Kazakhstan a few years ago. And they were all claimed by this one guy, and he's been selling them. And initially, he was offering them mostly to people within the Soviet countries at a fairly good price. So he was selling them at a fairly reasonable price, 100, 150 quid. And then he got wind that there were people in the West that were going to pay a lot more than that. So now he charges,
Yeah, we see the new old stock appear on eBay. Yeah,
basically, I was planning to try and get one, but it worked out. I could just as easily order one in the UK for the same price.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are some old, especially in Russia. I mean, there's some great old Spectrum clones, and there's a whole other history of Russian sort of video games, which are very different to the West as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that tangent, Alan. It's always interesting to hear how different, how retro is in different parts of the world. Chris Huelsbeck's video is linked in the show notes, so do go and check it out, and also share your thoughts in our subreddit on your. Actually, I think we might make this our question of the week, so we'll come back to Chris Huelsbeck a bit later for our question of the week. Go and check out the link for this and anything else we talk about in the show notes.
We'd normally be talking about this submission in briefs, but to explain why we aren't straight after, it's from DG Chris Fury, and it's Rose Tinted Spectrum's latest video titled Wild 80s Cringe. Now, it's not about Neil and I, but I've not been able to watch it, as on Sunday afternoon, YouTube closed Rosie's channel, citing it was a scam, immediately denied his appeal, and as of now, he is still going through the bureaucracy trying to get a human being to look at it. There's no reason why his channel should have been closed as far as I can see, nor he knows. He doesn't do anything untoward, other than counting jokes that Dominic Diamond makes in Games Master about knobs. Elk 1984 noticed and submitted to the subreddit about it. Now, I believe it'll be some awful AI-led process that a human hasn't been involved in yet. And I expect that by Saturday, because today is Monday, by Saturday it'll be ancient history, the channel will be back and nobody will be interested in this blip anymore. And if you're hearing this, it's because Duncan has edited it in to say at some point during the week, YouTube have restored his channel and all is nice and rose-tinted again. No new patrons this week, but of course, thank you to all the twirlers who keep us going. Thank you very much. I have booked another 3 guests between now and Christmas, where I think we'll have a 2-week break as usual. So 3 more guests coming. And I also got news hot off the press from Chris this morning. We may have a very special guest coming in the new year. You can probably take a guess at it, but I'm not going to say who it is. One that lots of people have requested.
On the topic of Chris, did you see there was a submission on the subreddit that he will really like? I'm just scrolling down to find it now. It's a special badge that you can replace the badge in the front of your car with. In this case, it's a VW badge, and it's called a Roo badge. So you put it in. So instead of having the Roo shoes on your wheels, the sound is emitted from the badge of your car to scare the kangaroos away. So Roo badge. Thank you to I am Paul H for submitting that.
On to briefs. 42 Nobody 42 links to an MVG Modern Vision Gamer video saying it's up to us to say video games, and he's covering what we talked about the other week about the US Copyright Office ruling, an important subject.
Manx Nick doesn't link us to an external article, but writes his own, and that's perfectly acceptable. Please do write your own opinion pieces, because heaven knows we cover opinion pieces in some of the stories that are linked on articles on places like Metro. So feel free to do that. He's telling us that the game Freelancer is now 21 years old and still fun. Freelancer is the sequel, but not fully the same gameplay from Starlancer. And it's from Chris Roberts, who, apart from the Wing Commander series and the upcoming? Is it upcoming? Yes, I think it is. Star Citizen. I did see a Star Citizen a couple of days ago. There was an update on the latest beta. So it is still developing. It is still very much happening, but heaven knows when it's coming out. What else did Chris Roberts do? Striker's Run for the BBC. So he goes back a long way. And he worked on Ultima 5 with Richard Garriott. Freelancer, go and read Nick's opinion piece on that.
Black Omega gives us a link to a rather melancholy LGR video where he unboxes his water damage collection. The damage isn't severe in general to the computers there, but the mold to the boxes is very sad, because a lot of these were perfect examples of how their whole retail package was, not just a machine that was separated from that on day one, and that's what you get from someone's loft. A lot of what Clint covered is the whole package of what you got with it, and it adds a lot of context and a lot of the original experience to it to have that. So it's a shame that that's all been damaged, but I'm glad to see him back on YouTube again.
Dr. Local links us to a new TV series about the Pirate Bay. So look out for that soon on the Pirate Bay. No, it's on SVT. I am tempted, Dave, to fire up the VPN and watch it via the Pirate Bay.
There's something that, how they complain when people don't. 42 Nobody, 42 with an image of the Red Dead Redemption discs, the install disc 1 of 63,985. It's probably a meme. Surely no one's made the actual disc for it.
I'd just be impressed if someone had 63,985 discs and a label printer that could cope with that. S-Rose FX tells us about Jean-Pierre Luminet visualizing a black hole on an IBM 7040 in 1978 using a ray tracing algorithm. Yes, the 3D technology, ray tracing, graphical work goes back far earlier than we think about. I love seeing examples, because it's rare that they were captured, that they were filmed. These things happened in labs, not on home computers. So it's really nice to see these examples.
And there is loads more on the subreddit. Go to www.reddit.r/thisweekinretro and submit stories, have a look at what people have submitted, add some comments, and participate in the question of the week. I think everyone loves a proper old-style retro shop. In fact, I know you do, Neil, because you made one.
I did, yeah.
For a while, they existed as a mainstream kind of thing with Game and CX in the UK, and I'm sure similar things in the USA and Europe and elsewhere, Australia perhaps. But thanks to Dr. Local, we're now aware of the situation in Ireland, which sounds a bit quite similar to the UK.
Yeah, Ireland is quite similar to the UK.
Yeah, but different accent though.
Yeah.
How Ireland's booming retro gaming market is filling a void for gamers, and it's talking about the success of a new retro shop in Ireland. I thought I'd cover how things have changed over the years in the UK at least. We're always interested to hear about overseas, how it's been there. But in the UK, in the 80s and 90s, we had some shops, some specialist ones. But in the UK, at least, we had games in mostly other high street shops. Big news agents had them. Like W.H. Smith. Electrical shops had it. Woolworth, just a general shop.
You didn't really have your chain of video game shops, did you?
No, that's
you
what
had
I'm meaning.
Independent shops.
Yeah.
You had chains like HMV that sold video games. But yeah, because of the way the market was, you had games on pegs in Woolworths and chemists and news agents, like you say, yeah.
Boots the Chemist had a huge, a huge section compared to what you would expect them to have, at least. And eventually smaller newsagents had them. The kind of thing that Neil created was kind of more along the W.H. Smith's idea. A shop within a shop kind of thing was how it worked. But we didn't really have chains of game shops so much until Game and CX. And over in the USA, and this is where I want to be corrected if I'm wrong, it tended to be your little independent computer shops like you had here, but also large electrical stores that you got the games in. And I'm not sure how it was in mainland Europe or elsewhere in the world. That's a potential question of the week for another time, I think.
Yeah, I do have good memories of visiting a US computer shop around 1993. It was just as you would imagine a US computer shop, and it was pivotal in my jump to the PC, seeing shelves upon shelves of not just big box games, but massive box games. The Sierra Adventure box games are like this thick, huge games. Really pushed me over the line from the Amiga to the PC. We had them in the UK, but seeing a shop absolutely rammed full of Sierra games was just a sight to behold.
I'm sure we didn't have them to the same scale. As time went on, though, I think games tended to move towards anywhere that you got DVDs, CDs and tapes. They ended up in our price, they ended up in HMV and so on. And of course, over time, the boxes shrunk until we got the DVD-style keep cases and the size of retail space reduced, and it's been reducing since, and it's much less now, as games are now just a code in a box, mostly. But we did get the second-hand game shops appearing perhaps towards the end of the 90s. You could swap your console cartridges, you could pay a bit and get a new game and hand in your old one. These evolved and stayed with us until games stopped fairly recently, and CX are probably going to eventually stop because game developers are making it less easy to sell the games you bought by making sure that you don't actually own them in the first place.
I was quite lucky, actually, in that I had access to a second-hand trading video game store from about, I want to say 1995, so fairly early on. It was independent, but I remember there being Neo Geos, Atari Jaguars, things like that to trade. And I this is where I got a lot of my Ultima games from originally for £1, £2 a game. So they did exist, but I know that was an exception to the rule. Yeah.
What we have now, though, is in no way pleasant. And I think if you're looking for games for micros and the pre-optical stuff, you're not going to find much in the chains at all. But going to CX to browse games, I would suggest, it's not the same thing at all. So Anthony Dobbs, the owner of the Retro Gaming Store Plus in Wexford in Ireland, opened up his shop in 2014. He started it off after being made redundant, and he started it as a small tech shop, and it's now 3 stories of retro gaming. As far as I can see, it's all console stuff, but I think that's understandable because the market for PC big box games and going back earlier to 16-bit and 8-bit stuff is much smaller. And it's also much more complicated. With a console game, you can plug it in and see if it works, and that's it sorted. With an 8-bit tape game, Now, Neil, do you remember talking about Chris about the end of game and what that meant maybe a year or two ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think all things considered, I'm much happier with independent game shops like this keeping things alive. And if they're going to spring up to replace Game, then I think I'm happy with that. And I know that Game sacked Chris, so that's a good thing as well.
Yeah.
There is one local to you, though, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. The Game is still around, Dave. I can visit Game anytime I want.
No, I don't mean Game. I mean, there's a retro shop near you.
Oh, there is. But there is also a Game conveniently located at the back of my nearest Sports Direct, where I can buy a selection of gift cards for online game stores.
Oh.
That's what Game has been reduced to, yeah. But yeah, just in case anyone missed it first time round, the Retro Gaming Store Plus in Wexford is the place to check out in Ireland. The ones near me, Retro Games HQ in Swindon and Super Tomato in Cardiff are my 2 local ones. Both great. Both stock some micro games, but Super Tomato does stock more in the way of 16-bit and PC boxed games, which is really rare in these shops. And I get it. It's easier to test a cartridge. They're much more resilient than a floppy disk. But short of recreating your own video game shop who would do that. These used game shops are the closest that we can get to recreating that feeling we used to get of going into these shops. So I really do love them. The independent ones, I don't get the same feeling going into CEX as I used to going into an old video game store in the 80s or 90s, but I do with some of the independent ones because you just don't know what you're going to find. I love it. Alan, you're jumping up and down there.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's interesting because I think it's a little bit like record stores, isn't it, right, with vinyl? Because you get these record stores and some of them, they really kind of develop a really good relationship with the people that are into the music and they let them know when something new is coming in. But having said that, and I've encountered some indie vintage sort of retro shops where they're so snobbish if you don't know absolutely everything about the particular Mega Drive release or whatever, But thankfully, those are fairly few and far between. I want to give a shout out actually to my friend Andy, who runs Lee's Games in Morecambe. That's completely independent.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was wondering if you'd mention him. Yeah.
It's one of Dave. You pop down there, don't you, Dave? Sometimes.
Well, I've been once to see him. I've been once to see him.
Yeah. So he's and he sells modern stuff as well, but he does a lot of the old stuff. And he's survived by building up a good customer base, good relationships with all the people that he knows. People come from all over the region. And I mean, I pop in. I don't always buy stuff there, but I just pop in and have a chat. And he's always happy to sit and chat about games and that kind of thing. So I think it ties back to what I was saying earlier on. While we were talking earlier about this kind of craft brewery sort of scenario where you build relationships with the people. It's a smaller crowd, but you actually know most of your customers. It's the same with what I do, and so you don't necessarily have to appeal to a wider audience as long as you know and have good relationships. And it does make me wonder if this area develops, could it be possible that some of these indie shops could actually start selling some of the homebrew or games that are being produced again now, physical copies. I mean, I suppose people mostly do it by mail order, right? But it might be a possibility in the future. Who knows?
It will all just come down to margins for these shops, won't it? If they can afford to stock it and make a cut on it because they've got bills to pay to run their shops, then sure, what that would be. In the book world, it's normally something like 40-45%. Whether indie developers can stomach that, I don't know. But when it comes to packaging them in the way you do to make a slightly more premium product, there's got to be a little bit of leeway, a little bit of scope to do that, I would have thought.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't mind letting a few go into the shops, even if it didn't make a lot of money, just for the fun of knowing that people could go into a shop and buy it, And
I know how excited Chris was when things like the Amiga Mini came out and he was straight down to a physical shop to buy it. And plenty of us, I know I would love that feeling to go to a shop and buy a brand new released Amstrad CPC Spectrum Amiga game. Atari ST for Dave. To pick that up off the shelf and pay for it. Love that. Yeah, like Seekonoid. When I bought the boxed version of Seekonoid, it was great to back it. It was great to do it online, but I would have loved to have plucked it off a shelf and bought it. Yeah.
Something the article did go on to mention is an eBay seller and talk about how his house is always full of retro hauls, which are then sold on, but it didn't mention car boot sales or things like Crash and other meets where games are sold. And I think that's probably been the backbone of it all, is sellers without a shop who do what shops did and turn up at things like Crash, which I think you'll be at soon, Alan.
Yeah, well, that's a nice point actually, because the way that one of the ways that we do this is that we bring people can pre-order online, but then we bring a lot of the physical media to the event. And then people have that experience of, and not only that, but you meet the person that coded the game and you can chat a little bit and they can buy the game, they hand it over, you can even sign it if that's what they want. And it's that whole social, personal touch thing that I think makes such a difference. It's really, really the reason that we do it, to be honest. Yeah.
So I can't say it's worth going to Ireland just to go to the shop, but maybe check on retro.directory and see if there's any physical shops near you and pay them a visit. For all you know, there might be. Neil says a couple, and Cardiff's not local to you, Neil, but that's the closest to what you're saying, I think.
It's I can get there in an hour, and for a specialist shop, it's worth doing that.
Yeah. So thank you for that submission there. Links in the show notes.
Time now for our community question of the week. And last week's question was a little bit of a funny one because I said, let's help each other to explore and find some cool PC demos on the Exa Demo Scene download. So you were kind of downloading something, installing it, and making recommendations to me, which is a big ask, I know, rather than just asking for your opinion. So the top answer also talked about some people were having problems downloading it. So some of you hit some technical hurdles getting a hold of it. So I'm just going to rattle through some of the nice suggestions that we've got. And I have gone through and watched all of these. So thank you to suggestions from Route 42, who suggested Panic by the Future Crew, which has a nice selection of Mandelbrots and Plasma. You can't beat that combo. Dope, he's suggested a 1995 demo, which has nice boxes that pop up of the names of the effects you're seeing on the screen, such as Fong shading. I liked that one. And a morphine copper cat features. So anything with a cat is a winner. Crystal Dreams 2, not 1 or 3, 2, was a demo that supports ultrasound. So I enjoyed hearing that. And Timeless by Tran is also one with ultrasound support, although I did have to manually figure out the base address and IRQ of the ultrasound settings. For anyone else who's trying it on Exa Demo Scene, it's 240 and 3 are the settings that it's set up with. And then another one suggested by viewer Salem was called Super Television, and I think this was my favorite of all the suggestions. It's super grimy. It's got a Bruce Lee jump scare in the demo. It's got a really nice roller coaster effect in there, really cool. And then the demo just ends by simply shouting at you. It kind of screams at you and shuts off. But I really like that one. And then finally, CS Marauder suggested Fishtro, which has some nice particles, fish, and some lemmings. Thank you for Fishtro. I did enjoy that. Astral Blur was also recommended, but I found that to be a bit choppy. And I don't know if that's my PC or the emulation or the demo pushing the emulation in ways that it can't handle. I don't know, but it did look nice what I saw of it. So those are some great suggestions. Thank you for taking part. Dave, any comments on this week's question of the week?
Last week I felt we should have mentioned the C64 at some point. The C64 has been the stalwart of demos since it was introduced. People are still making demos for it, and it's one of the most impressive places to see demos because it's such a limited system in that you can fully utilize it to do a demo, whereas when you get to the Amiga, it's much more complicated, and the PC more complicated again. With the C64, you can do amazing things within a small system. So the C64, we should have mentioned, I think, at some point there, and someone pointed that out. The C64.
The Spectrum's worth mentioning too, because that's even more limited.
It's true, yeah.
I mean, yes, Spectrum fans, I did say that the Spectrum is more limited than the C64, but it is. So.
It's like a cut-down Amstrad.
Yeah. So that takes us on to this week's question of the week, which is quite simply, what's your favourite Chris Huelsbeck soundtrack? And when you reply, please include a link, perhaps to a YouTube link, so that we can all have a listen to it. We can have a little listening party and celebrate Chris Huelsbeck together. We'll have a listen next week and go through them. Anything else to add before we wrap up this week's show, Dave?
No, thank you very much, Alan, for coming on. Again, links in the show notes. Have a look at his Midnight Brew. It's not very much money. Stick your hand in your pocket. It's for a good cause. And we'll see you next week, people.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alan. Bye-bye. He's waving.
I'm waving. Alan's waving.
I'm waving.
I'm waving.
Neil's waving. Bye-bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.